Today is March 29th, 2023. My name is Dr. Jason Higgins. I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia, at the Athenaeum in the Virginia Tech Library. Joining me for an oral history interview is Mary Lyle Buff. This interview is part of an oral history project that is documenting the family histories of descendants of the Prestons and the Fractions, whose descendants lived at Solitude and Smithfield plantations in Blacksburg, Virginia. May I call you Mary Lyle?
That works.
Excellent. And do you mind stating your full name for the record?
Yes. Mary Lyle Jeans Buff.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for being willing to participate in the project and to share your story. And do I have your permission to record the interview?
You do. You have my permission to record.
Thank you. And could we just start from the beginning? So when and where were you born?
I was born in Charlottesville, Virginia in 1986, September 21st.
We're both September babies from the same generation. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So tell me about what it was like. Did you grow up in Charlottesville?
Outside of Charlottesville. Yeah. So I grew up in Orange County, Virginia, on a farm right on the Rapidan River, sort of on the border of Madison and Orange.
So what was it like growing up there?
It was lovely, honestly. I lived in a very old house, built in the 1800s, and it was a lot of time outside. We didn't have neighbors because it was a larger farm, so you had to drive 10, 15 minutes to get to anybody. So we spent a lot of time just running around outside. We had lots of dogs and cats. It wasn't a working farm at the time. There were individuals that ran cattle on the farm, so it was technically a cattle farm. So, you knew what fields not to go into, or you figured it out pretty quick. But there was a river and a pond, and we had a really big yard and a garden, and my dad built us a tree fort from logs on the property. And so it was just a very old school, idyllic kind of childhood. And I had a couple of friends that lived in town, so if I could go hang out at their house and run around from neighborhood house to neighborhood house, so I got a little bit of a feel for that. But for the most part, it was like, skinned knees and old jeans and watching out for poison ivy and snakes. And that was kind of my childhood.
It sounds like something I've read in a novel at some point.
Very like Huck Finn or something.
Right. Yeah. Do you have siblings as well?
I do. I have two younger sisters. We're separated by 3 years, and then 4 years to the next one. So 3 and 7 for me to my sisters. And sorry, I kicked my desk. So I had good playmates as a child, and they were very adventurous. So we did a lot of hiking on the farm and stuff, and finding tadpoles and things.
And tell me about your parents. Who were they, and what did they do?
So my mom had been a real all-star athlete. She played for the U.S. lacrosse team and lettered in 4 sports in college. I don't know how you do that, but it was back in the day before scholarships and stuff. So she kind of ended up with a dream team, and it was a really cool story. I always really admired that about her. And so she had this really strong, energetic presence and kept us moving. And she worked as a teacher and a coach for a while. And when she got pregnant with me, she ended up staying home with us until we were, in school age, and then started a landscaping business and gardens and design. And my dad, he was a middle school math teacher when I was a kid. Like when I was really little, I used to go into the school and visit him at the Prospect Heights or whatever. And he was also incredibly skilled with carpentry. So as time passed, he ended up going into contracting and carpentry. He became like a master cabinet maker. And so he was often up at 4 a.m., would make breakfast for us. And there was a picture on the the whiteboard, and he was already gone to work by the time we got up. And then he would come home in the evening. So he worked a lot, worked very hard. And eventually he got into historic restoration and ended up working on the project at Montpelier. But when I was really little, he was mainly carpentry. And my mom was stayed home with us. And so that was kind of the little niche that we fell into.
Okay. And what was school like for you? Did you go to public school?
So I started out at like our little church preschool, one of the 5,000 churches that are Orange County. So I went to a little church preschool, and then it's like all churches and like car dealerships. And then went to the public elementary school for kindergarten through 5th grade. And then I did not go to Prospect Heights Middle School. I went to Grimes Memorial School, which is a tiny little private school just down the road from our farm, where my dad actually went to school as a kid. So I went there for 3 years for my middle school years, and I think my grandparents paid for us so that we could do that, because that was not really on our agenda. And I went back to public school for high school. I missed my friends. I was not a real big fan of like 10 people in your class or your grade. Like, that's just too few people.
Right.
Yeah. Like, if you don't get along, then it's like miserable. And middle school's a really rough time in general. So it was a hard time to be with a bunch of kids that had been going to school together since they were like in kindergarten. Not my favorite. But the teachers were excellent. And I will say that I had probably 5 or 6 just phenomenal educators that made that time really worthwhile, as socially agonizing as it was. So I think that set me up really well.
That's fantastic. That's really great. Can you talk about your family history? At what point in your early life did you start to become aware of the Preston family history?
So ever since we were little, we would go to my great-grandmothers were still alive on that side of the family, the great-grandmother on that side and then a great-grandmother on the other side. And we would go to Richmond to see them. And they were in like retirement homes there. And when we would go to Richmond, we would always go visit the various monuments that were either to members of my family or made by members of my family. So the various corners of my family are all intertwined in like interesting ways. And I say interesting, not in the normal definition of that word. So like, there was a lot of intermarrying, and there was a lot of like, different groups coming in from all. So you'd have people who were on one side of the family that were, made the monument. They were like an artist of the time. And of the time, I think that important with monuments is most of them weren't made back in the day when those people were alive. They were very recent, like Daughters of the American Revolution, like running around, or Daughters of the whatever, commissioning these things in much more recent history for probably not the best reasons. And so we would go visit them, though. We'd go to the battlefields, and we'd go have picnics, which is so creepy in retrospect. And we go climb up on these things like, oh, look, that's Uncle Eddie's statue, and, go hang out. And it really was this kind of very glazed awe experience as a small child. And we would go to the big, we would always drive past the family houses in Richmond. And I'm descendant from the Valentines on the other, the Prestons married the Valentines is my way in. And so there's the Valentine Museum in Richmond. So we would go to the family museum and see the weird beds that they slept in and the crazy art that they commissioned. And we would go to the graveyards, and we would go to visit the gravestones of different relatives, or there would be a funeral when a great-grandparent died. And so there was this kind of like, I think glazed awe is a good word for it, because it's all very foggy and lovely, like some sort of sheer gossamer, that's been hung up, and it's like quite beautiful outside. And that was when I was a small child. So I kind of break up my experience into 3 distinct portions, which is the young child who grew up on a farm in hand-me-down clothes, didn't go on fancy vacations, never had flown in a plane. Like, I was very like life's great and there's dirt under my fingernails and I don't know how to style my hair. And, like that kind of thing. And then, the second phase of like growing up as an adolescent and starting to be more aware of my place in the world and realizing, there's some, differences here. There's some things going on. And then I started to go visit these family spaces, and it was a little bit different. It was like, so I've taken history classes and I know what this time period was like. And this is a really big farm, which means it's a plantation. And like suddenly realizing that the farm that I grew up on, which was not my family farm, it was bought by my grandparents just before my father was born. So it was bought in like the 50s. It was a massive plantation. And there was an area where we could go look for artifacts, where the slave quarters used to be, where the Native American arrowheads could be found. And it was like this kind of middle portion where I started to realize that the history wasn't very pretty, and that sort of gossamer or that sheer glaze and awe started to disappear, and it was like a little creepy. And I just kind of distanced myself from all of that. But there was still a feeling of like, wow, they were special people and they did a lot of big stuff and they were part of the government and they ran all these things and they started all these schools. And like, did you know that like every freaking school around here was started by someone from your family? Like, those kinds of things, like they still hit that pride note inside of you, even though you're also looking at the time period and going, interesting. Like we didn't just recently come over from like Europe and never had anything to do with that stuff. We were like, okay, interesting. So
as you're starting to pull back the veil on the reality of the family history of the Prestons, what did those conversations look like with your family members?
They were short. They were very short. It was the sort of thing where you would, I as a child, one of my first memories of sort of reckoning with the past, since that seems to be a good phrase to use, was I was reading in a history book. I love to read. I'll read anything cover to front. And if a teacher tells me don't read ahead, well, by the end of the night, that book will be done. So I would read ahead my whole history book. It's all stories. Like it's the same as a novel. It's not like math where it's like facts. So I would read it and I'm like, I remember crying really, really, really hard in my room and being so upset and coming to my mom and saying, Mom, we're horrible people, meaning like white people. Like at that time, it was like the first time I realized that there was a distinction between, because I went to public school, like in an elementary school, everybody was in class. It wasn't like there were like, there was diversity in the public school system. And in those early years, you weren't separated by classes. Everyone was in every class. Like you were friends with everybody. And so I was like, we're terrible people. Like we shouldn't exist. Like we really this is horrible. And I was reading about the Native Americans and I was reading about the slave trade, and, they just like smush it up into a couple little boldly headed little excerpts. And for me, like as a person who loves stories, like it was not just a little excerpt in my book. It came alive and it was very real and it was very, very, very painful. And I felt that it was mine. And that was, it was a big, big, big problem. And I was reassured that these were bad people who did bad things in a bad time. And those bad people are not you. That bad time is not now. And those bad things don't happen now. And, I was a child. So I was comforted by that. But clearly not completely, because it still bothered me. It still really, really bothered me. And it's like those are those times when, well, what did you do about it? I didn't do anything about it. I just circled it inside of me to make sure I didn't do those things. But again, there was no long conversation. There was no discussion of what those things were and what they look like now. And so, I think And my mom like definitely tried. Like I think she got me like for Christmas that year, the books that I got were like Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, like that kind of thing. And, you know, so it wasn't like she was unaware, but she really wanted her daughter, I think, to not feel bad about something that I didn't do. And I get that sentiment.
In our pre-interview, you called that a missed opportunity.
Yes.
Can you explain what you mean by that? Like, how should your mother have responded to you with these feelings?
I can't say how she should have, because I can't know what the best answer would have been, but I can say that it was an opportunity in which a deeper discussion could have been had. That, you know what, sweetie, this is a very dark period of time, but it's not that far away. And it is something that your relatives were direct perpetrators of. They were slave owners. That was never said. They pushed the Native Americans out. They were given land that wasn't theirs to colonize. Like, if anybody can say they're a colonizer, like, that's straight in my blood. Like, that's what my family was brought over from. The Scotch-Irish were brought over to Virginia to do that, to push people out, to keep the perimeter safe, and to establish the land. And so that conversation could have been had. And then the secondary portion of that is that, you know, it's not over. That sentiment still is alive. And those things were never connected. It was said to me in cases like, you know, there were specific words that were never to be uttered in our house. They were never heard. So it wasn't like, you know, but if someone, like any racial slurs, anything like that, if it was seen in a movie or heard somewhere in town or something like that, it was very clear that we don't use that. We don't agree with that. We don't believe in that. You know, there is no difference between people. We don't see color was the sort of thing, which is always that, you know, and that's like, again, another missed opportunity. No, you have to see it, and you have to talk about it, and you have to acknowledge it. And then you have to make sure that you're not acting with bias. And that was what was missing, is there was no room for, and we still have bias in our family. There was no room for that. It was just, they're dead. They did it. We didn't do it. We're not even going to talk about them. We're just going to say people of the time. And, you know, when I was that adolescent to young adulthood period, there's two other experiences, sort of my college years. And if this is a good time to move into that, I can do that now.
Well, could I ask one follow-up question from that? Today, there are reactionary forces all across the United States who are responding to that sense of guilt, to this idea that learning about the history of the United States traumatizes children, that it damages them, it makes them feel guilty, it causes depression and mental health problems and all of this. And that answer is censorship, right? The reactionary forces, the right wing in the United States wants to censor education and ban books, right? Drawing from your own personal experiences as someone who's been grappling and continues to grapple and reckon with this history, what insights would you offer, and like, how would you illuminate that conversation? What would you want to tell them?
I would say that the greatest gift you can give a child is the truth. Because the entire basis of reality is in everyone's head. What we see, what we perceive, is then processed in our mind. We don't see the world the way it is. We experience what our sight gives us. We experience what our ears give us. And everything we know and experience is based on previous experiences and the way that our brain has developed to receive said experiences. So our mind works in heuristics. Our mind works in patterns, stories. So the greatest gift you can give a child is a truthful story. It doesn't have to be the whole truth, but enough truth that it gives them room to understand more truth that they can take in later. And something that's always really, well, not always, I say always, it's so dramatic, something that resonates with me now, and I learned in my practice with yoga and the sort of the philosophy and religion and scriptures that are associated with it, is this idea. There was this one teacher, and the student asked the teacher, what's the point of all this? Is it nirvana? Is it oneness with God, or whatever you want to call it, source, or just the universe, whatever you practice. You can be Christian and still say one with God, right? It's the same thing. And the teacher responds, and I just think this is so beautiful, with, no, oneness with God is not the purpose. Being truth is the purpose. Because if you can be truth, you can see truth and be truth, then you can act in a way that you will never, ever regret. And you think about that today, the idea of no regrets. It's so big. It's everywhere. And it's being read wrong. No regrets doesn't mean doing whatever you want and then choosing not to regret it. No regrets means knowing exactly what you are, who you are, where you are, and what the world is, so that your actions are never regrettable because you are in turn acting truthfully. And that starts with the way you perceive the world as a child. How are you supposed to see the world and make an honest assessment of it if you haven't been given the full truth? And it's not about making children feel guilt, but if a child is going to feel guilty about something when you tell them, regardless, it means that something is very painful and it hasn't been processed yet in our society. If a child is going to feel grief and regret about it, that means it's a cultural regret. It's a regret that's held within the psyche of the entire culture, has not been processed, will not be processed unless you talk about it and allow the children to process it, allow the adolescents to process it, allow the adults to process it. And it's quite possible that some people will never be able to process it, but that's okay because it's a culture. It's not just that one child's, and that's the missed opportunity to say to the child, this isn't your regret to hold. This is your culture's regret, but you can be a part of alleviating that regret. It's not yours. You're not responsible for it alone, but you can take responsibility and cleanse it for yourself. And if more people did that, then I just feel like it would work better.
That's really eloquent. So I'm curious about this phasing of your life, the way you describe it. And these earlier phases, whenever, your family history is idyllic and glossy and beautiful, and you start to unveil the real truth behind that. I'm curious about your actual interactions with Black people during this time. Did you?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Sure. So, like I said, in my elementary school, there were plethora of everybody, right? I had Black kids in my class. I had friends that would call me. I didn't have a lot of friends that would come over to my house, though, or that I would go to their house. So a lot of times as a kid, you go to the houses of the friends that your parents are friends with their parents, especially in a small town. So all my closest friends were white. All my best friends were white. That is an important fact, I think, to be very clear about. However, I danced in a primarily Black company. And so, that was, to me, and this is my perspective at the time, was Black people were cooler and better dancers. That was just the perspective that I had. And I thought that the disparity between Black and white was because white people weren't as cool. So Black people didn't want to hang out with them as much, as you got older and started to see we're gawky and awkward. And I was gangly and I danced, but people would get a real kick out of me trying to do some of the moves, But our company, we won first and second. Our senior and junior company won first and second in every dance competition we went to because we were incredible, and I would say that a lot of that had to do with the fact that it was run by a Black man and it was full of Black girls that danced really well. And, there was some incredible white girls that danced in the group as well. But my opinion was always very elevated of any of the Black friends that I had. which was extremely concerning for me when I came back from elementary school, skipped middle school, right? That's when they sort you all out. That's when you start getting prepped for the honors courses and stuff. I came back from a private school, and none of my Black friends existed anymore. Like, they weren't in any of my classes. I had completely lost touch with them. And all my white friends from elementary school were in class with me. So it was like, okay, well, and did I do anything about that? Did I go, where did they go? Did I go find them? No, I didn't. I had some Black friends that were in our classes. There was a very small group of them. And I was involved in like key clubs and like things like that. And there were a couple girls that were like very dynamic in school. And so I kept friendship with them. And, but it definitely, the system itself kind of funnels you. And it's like, you know, you're a busy kid and you're running around and you've got people to talk to. You've got sports, you've got homework. I didn't drive. So I didn't go to parties. I didn't go out. So I really got completely siphoned into the people I was in class with. And then, you know, you had gym class and you had sports, but not a lot of Black girls play field hockey. So I didn't play. And I learned later that it's actually an incredibly racist establishment. And some of my Black coworkers would talk about how their daughters loved it and played it. But it just got to the point where it was horrid for them to continue in the sport, which just breaks my heart because I loved field hockey. But yeah, I didn't play basketball outside of middle school. And we didn't have a lot of Black girls on our swim team. So I swam for the high school and I played field hockey and I was in all of the AP and honors classes. And I wasn't in like band or anything in my extracurricular. So nothing wove me in with these friendships except for my dance friends. But I stopped dancing in order to play sports. So I just very much got completely spiraled into this very small group of friends that I hung out with in class. And then I either went to my job or I went to sports and then I went home. And I didn't party on the weekends. So it completely just reduced my interaction to like nothing, which it was a weird experience. And you see people in the halls, and like I took like drafting class, and there was, you know, some of my Black friends were in class there. But like, again, it was like, oh, hey, how are you? Like, you know, it wasn't like, hey, why aren't we ever in class together anymore? Why don't you play sports that I play? Like, it just was, I think I was still operating in that safe space of, well, I'm not a cool person. I've never been a cool person. I've always been the nerd, the gangly one, the awkward one, the slightly ADD, hyperactive, you know, nobody dates kind of person. And all right, well, if my mode of operation is Black people are way cooler than white people, then of course I don't have a lot of Black friends. I'm not very cool. And like, that's a very safe way to look at the world. You can see how like you build these like very safe, self-deprecating, safe worldviews to understand it. And I would get like, as I got older, like I'd be at like a restaurant or what, and I'm the sort of person that'll say hi to anybody, like, hi, how are you? Like, whatever. And I would get these kind of like looks from especially Black women. And I'd be like, oh, okay, well, I guess they're just angry people, right? There's that typical like whatever that comes in. And it's like, no, I am literally a triggering image. Like, I am about as white colonialist as you get. Like, Kira will say to me, she's like, if you want to know the definition of a Karen, what it looks like, there's Mary Lyle right there. Like, she looks like a Karen. And I'm like, oh, I mean, I don't have the haircut right, but I get it. And it's like, it makes so much more sense. Again, I think very little of myself. And that's something I've had to work on my whole life. Like, I carry around a lot of like, whatever, shame, guilt, fears of not fitting in, like been teased, I've been, you know, made fun of, I've been ostracized in a lot of different ways. So I always operate on, it's something I'm doing that is like I'm just annoying and people don't want to be around me. Or, and this is what you're told when you're teased and tormented, they're just mean. They're just mean. And so that would be a safe thing for me to think was, okay, well, these girls don't like me because they're just mean. And okay, you know.
I'm curious, at what point did that worldview or understanding of the world start to become more complicated than just, I don't fit in, they don't like me, they're cool, right? Like these generalizing types of descriptions of entire people. Like, where did that start becoming more complicated in your thinking?
It wasn't entire people. It was just those specific, like if I ran into someone somewhere and they responded to me, it wasn't like all, because I had, again, like I said, I had these really close girlfriends from dance. So it wasn't like a generalization of an entire, it wasn't monolithic. It was literally just those individuals, whoever was saying it, is they don't like me. And the trend would be, you know, there, but it wasn't as if, as for example, I had one girl that was really, really kind of horrible, tormenting in high school. And there was two of them. One was a white girl and she was friends with my best friend, but my best friend went to another county school. So it was competition. Now suddenly we're all in the same school and she didn't like that I was friends with her and thought I was annoying. Well, then she was close with this other girl who was black. And so there's a white girl and a black girl. And they both tormented the shit out of me for like, I don't know, a good 6 months. And finally my mom was like, you better call Tiffany. She was an older girl that I danced with. And you just need to talk to her because she's older. She will know what's going on. And so I talked to Tiffany, and Tiffany's also black. And Tiffany said, oh, I know this chick. I know what's going on. It'll be done tomorrow. And she went and took care of it for me. She was like, you don't mess with her. There's nothing wrong with her. She's solid. And it was fine after that. So in that situation, it was really, again, it's always, and this is what was for me, made it so difficult to sort of process, was like, not so difficult to process, but the lines didn't add up because I had all these caveats, right? Like I was close with all the girls I danced with. They were all nice to me. They liked me. They said hey to me in the hall, you know, gave me high fives. They were all older than me though. So it wasn't like it was a girl from my own grade that I wasn't in class with. So again, and then anytime there was an actual problem with people, it was usually just an issue that needed to be sorted out. And then there was never a problem again. And this is the thing that I also found. And this is why I came to think that it was, people wouldn't like me and thought I was stuck up. Well, I was also really like debilitatingly shy. So I like, yeah, really, really, really shy. And I actually thought that I used to blush because I would get so hot if I was talking to someone. I don't. So it was never happening, but I thought it was. So I would be like trying to hide my face, even though I was not actually blushing. Anyway, so it would make no sense. So people thought I was like a total snob. And I'm sure there were stories about how I lived on the big rich mansion farm out the corner of whatever, and my family was super well. Listen, I'm wearing hand-me-downs. I can't afford to go buy cute clothes. Like, I don't feel special at all. I don't have a car. I'm not allowed to go out and party. I'm not allowed to, you know, I don't feel special. And so it was like, I came to like understand it in terms of there was something wrong with me. And so people didn't like me. And then I would notice like kind of retrospectively, oh, this was the sort of thing where, yeah, does that make sense? Like it's very hard to, it was so weirdly complicated with so many odd little like thises and thatses that, yeah. But I knew that I triggered as I got older by being really like, hi, how are you? Or whatever. I felt like I triggered Black women to be like, the fuck is wrong with this girl? And it kind of makes sense because if one, I look like a Karen, I'm the sort of person you want to just like not deal with. And you want to like get her quiet fast. And then two, if I'm totally insecure, then I'm just reading into anybody, you know? And then anyone I met and talked to and hung out with or worked with, super close relationships, super great relationships. Like I never had problems at work. Like any of my colleagues, like I always was really close with all my colleagues, regardless of like race or whatever. Like that never was a problem. It was just that kind of like you go out to a bar or you're at a restaurant or you're like bump into somebody in a crowd or something, like those kind of situations.
So you mentioned a couple of other stories that you wanted to tell before I asked you to talk more about that guilt issue in the United States currently. Could you tell me those stories? I'm sorry to interrupt that train of thought.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's best to interrupt me. I kind of talk to figure out what my brain is thinking because it goes so fast. So, okay. So visited Smithfield for a family reunion in college.
And where did you go to college, just for the record?
St. Mary's College of Maryland.
Okay.
A very small little public honors college on the coast. So my cousin and I went to this reunion with family members, and we were sitting in this reunion, and we're like, wow, everyone's like super old. And there's nobody but white people here. There's not even like an Asian wife. Like, there's no black people. There's no Asian people. There's no, like, we even got really excited because we saw like this, like, I think maybe Korean and group come, and they were just going to the wrong room. They were going to a wedding reception or something that was down the hall. And we were like, Jesus. And it just kind of like was a weird feeling. Like, it felt very stark. And then the conversations that they were talking about, like the guy was speaking about, like, you know, how great the pre-antebellum or the antebellum period is, and, you know, like the amazing things our family did. And we're like looking at each other and we're like, yeah, because they had slaves and a lot of free time. Like, you know, like, anybody going to mention that? And then we were walking around the plantation, and we were just like, this is creepy. Like, why are we here? Why are we just like having lunch here? Like, it just felt gross. And we were like, okay, we just need to get out of here. We just need to go. And so we just kind of decided, like, well, we're just not coming back to that kind of stuff. And we're just going to like not participate in this. That was our way of dealing with it. Was like, okay, well, we don't want to put energy into this sort of whatever. We're just going to not participate in it. And so that's what we did, is we didn't go down again, and we didn't, really, we would talk about it kind of like, oh, awkward.
Was that your first time to visit Smithfield?
I'd been as a little girl, probably 7, running around, and like, it was just a farm at the time, there's a house, and there's like cool things, and there's a gift shop, and that means candy, or toys or whatever. Like, love me some gift shops. And, oh, cool, our family had a house. How cool. So.
I'm just curious, how were histories of slavery or Jim Crow or segregation represented or talked about, if they were at all?
At the time, the first thing I would do when I went into any old house is I would go to the back stairs by the kitchen, and I would look for where the door was worn out from the hands of the servants and slaves pushing that door open in their entrance to the house. Because my dad had done the restoration at Montpelier at this point, and I had worked out there and been out there throughout the whole thing, and I had gotten to see the house stripped back, and I had gotten to see them find all the different thises and thatses. And there was a strong push during that restoration to look at the incredible contributions of the enslaved to that building and that area. There was the entire train station was redone with a retrospective. You could, hear stories and see whatever. And the fact that Madison's his steward was in a lot of ways his co-conspirator in a lot of his writings and his studies and whatnot. I mean, he ran everything by him. He was his confidant and was clearly an incredibly educated man who had a lot to offer, both in the running of the plantation and, I'm sure, in the making of our country's founding words. So that had been a really wonderful experience to see a place come to life with a full story And I think it was so juxtaposed when I went down to the Smithfield to be like, oh my gosh, because I went and found the door and I looked to see, and you can see where it's worn. Because those are the reminders that are there that you can't get rid of. I mean, you can paint over it, sure, but they're not going to do that because it's the original wood, and everyone loves how glorious that sounds. This was original wood from the local whatever, that whole thing. But in those sort of self-glorifying moments, you can find the marks and the reminders of who was really there. And so as a young child, very different experience. It's just a cool old house. I love architecture. I love buildings. I love symmetry. I think it's so cool. And so for me, it was just like, oh, cool place to explore. Like, I wonder if there's any hidden whatevers. We were always looking at our house to see if there was like a secret door in the cellar for like the Underground Railroad or something, though you got those stories in school. And then you were left to maybe have a conversation here or there at home. It wasn't a regular thing though. And then you were left to just fantasize about it. You were left to fantasize about, I wonder if this house was part of that. And I wonder if the people here were actually secretly helping people. And Kira asked me a question. This is a little bit sideways, but I think it's important. You can stick it wherever you want. But Kira asked me a question when we first met, because I was talking about how, like, imagining as a kid, I used to imagine if I could just go back and like get everybody out. Like, just get them out. She's like, it's interesting. Why wouldn't you just go back and stop slavery? And I was like, and it's a whole like white savior complex thing coming in. Like, I wanted to go back and save people. It's like, oh, fuck, that's creepy. Like, I just wanted to take someone else's pain as an opportunity to go like save people. That seems really off. That's like very Lord Jim. But the question really, really, I appreciated that question so much because it reminded me of what a professor in college had me look at. So again, this is around that same time that I came back to that Smithfield reunion. We taught a class on civilization and European expansion. It was like, your 101 US class or world history class that you had to take, and everyone's like asleep at the wheel. But I thought this teacher was incredible. And so she and I would like hang out and talk, and I read cover to cover all the books that she gave us to read. And one of them, it talked about how basically white people, Europeans, were able to justify their actions by saying something as simple as, this person doesn't know how to use a bicycle, therefore they are less than me. They're clearly not as evolved. They don't have a bicycle. They don't have bicycles. How would they know how to use something they don't have? Look at all the stuff they do have. Look at how they understand how the land works, and they don't destroy it by running around, just bending it to their whim. Like, you're missing the point here. They don't know how to use a bicycle, which means they might see the world in some beautiful new way, which goes back to that idea of truth. Here's your version of truth. They have a version of truth that if you guys share your versions together, you're going to have a better understanding of how the world works in general. And so when she asked me that question, I realized, oh God, that's so silly. Like, as a child, I would do that, like fantasize is not the right word. I would, in order to quell that feeling of deep pain for what had happened and I couldn't fix, I would imagine fixing it. I mean, that's a pretty normal thing to do. You stand up in class and you say something stupid, and for the next 4 weeks, you imagine what you could have said instead, right? But it doesn't actually change anything, and it doesn't actually build a new future. It doesn't really prepare you for a new situation that you're unprepared for. So the question Kira asked, tied in with that experience from those courses, very much created this idea of, wow, what would have happened if? What could the world look like now if this didn't happen? And wouldn't that be the great thing to imagine and think about, so that then that thought could be brought to life in a new way? So that was an experience, again, missed opportunity when I went back to Smithfield and decided, oh, this is creepy. I just don't want to associate anymore. So instead of leaning in and saying, how could this be different? It was, ugh, avoid.
So at what point did you stop avoiding your family history and start to become more involved in it?
That would be in 2020 during the pandemic, and right around what was the date for George Floyd?
It was
Do we know the date
June
of that?
of 2020, I believe.
I need to know the date though. Let me see. I meant to look that up right before we talked. I'll pull it up real quick. May 31st, 2020. Okay. So there was, I think, stuff floating around before that. Things were getting really hyped in general. I don't like social media. I think it's exhausting. I'm kind of like a homebody kind of person. And so I had gotten back on social media just to kind of see what was going on with the world. Like, okay, stuff's getting kind of intense. Like, we should probably check out what's happening. And there was this feeling like, okay, well, none of that stuff that I do, right? I'm not causing specifically anything. So I can't fix that. And the experience with George Floyd, the murder, the backlash, the intensification of everything across the board, it was like, well, clearly what I'm doing isn't working though. Like, just being a good person and not being friends with everyone I'm connected with, being kind to everyone, not, I don't even know, just being a good person was kind of what I thought. Like, you just be a good person and that's how you do it. It's not working. Like, either there's not enough of us doing whatever it is that I'm quote unquote doing right now, or what I'm doing isn't working. So it's one of the two things. And like, none of my family members were, like my close cousins and siblings, like none of us were like completely agnostic to the whole situation. Like, we'd go to marches, we would sign petitions, we would donate to things. Like, we were involved in local community stuff. Like, we cared and gave back to the best of our ability, that kind of thing. So it wasn't like, it was like, wow, I've never done anything in my life and now I have to start doing something. It was like, this doesn't work. Like, supporting the right NGOs and, caring about drinking water in small communities, like it's not working. So what's wrong? What am I not doing? What are people not doing? And that was, we're not talking about the past. We're not addressing the fact that the past is still very much present today. And this is so white. This is so ridiculous, but I have a book club with some girlfriends from college, and we have a lot of history people in the. So we'd read like The Warmth of Other Suns. Like, for years, I've been taking in literature, and like I told you, I love to read. I love history, especially. Like, my dad gave me a People's History of the United States when I was like in high school, because I was like, I don't think they're giving us the full story in here. And he's like, here, like I love Naomi Klein, and like I'm big on the whole like shock doctrine and all that stuff. I believe very much that the world is exploitative and it is based around that. And therefore it's not going to change until people choose to change, right? So again, not a stranger to any of this kind of thinking that people are being disadvantaged and in disparate ways based on class, race, location, all of it. So, but there are plenty of people that know that. There are plenty of people that care. There are plenty of good people in the world. It's not changing. So what's not being done? And that's where we came back to, we're not addressing our past, our role in it, and what eventually developed in my mind and with the group that I ended up working with into the cultural regret, the cultural, the cultural, what would you call it? Like, there's a word for it. Transgressions, the cultural transgression, the cultural debt, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that get trespass against us, that kind of thing. Our cultural trespasses is a good word, I think. That was not being dealt with. And the very clear and obvious one for me was Smithfield. I'd been there. I didn't think it was doing the right thing. I didn't agree with it. I had left. I hadn't said anything to anybody. So I had the text message I sent to my cousins and my sisters, and I was like, I would really like to get a group together. I want to write a letter to Smithfield. I want them to know that we feel they should do something more.
And what was the response from Smithfield?
Everyone was like, yes, 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 yes. Like my aunts all wanted to be involved. It was like, whoa, okay. That's a lot of people. I don't want to deal with all y'all at once. But so we got together and we drafted a letter and we sent it to Ryan, and it was received very well. And he said, we are in the process of doing changes. There are things we're working on. These are the things that we're working on. We would love your help. Again, none of us are, a lot of us are young, teenage 25s, 30s. And so it's not like we're like the big donor class, right? We're not the boomers with their retirement and their houses that they bought for $50,000 that are now worth $2 million. That's not us. We're the ones that have gotten all the recessions. But that can't be the reason that you don't do something. So that was kind of how it happened. It was, again, I thought I was a very aware person that was involved in the right things. I was doing the right things. I was a good person. I didn't, I didn't make people feel like they were less than me, because I don't think that people are less than me, so how could I be a problem if I genuinely think that pretty much all people are just people and people need people? So why wouldn't you like somebody for any reason other than they're an asshole? In which case, maybe they need a hug. That's kind of how I operate.
So in your speech that you read at Virginia Tech last year, you talked about individualism versus a communal responsibility to reckon with the past.
Yes.
At what point did this, for you, become not just a group of individuals among particularly white individuals in the Preston family working to redress your own family's history, and at what point did that start happening in conversation with Black people and other people who are marginalized in society?
Yeah. So at the same time I was reaching out for this, I reached out to friends from high school to talk to them about how I'm suddenly very, very aware that just being a nice person really wasn't enough. And I'm sorry. I just feel like I need to say that, because that's unacceptable. So I reached out to my home community. I helped as I could from afar. There was some events that were done back home. I reached out to my college. There was a very small group of kids that went to our school that were Black, and they all kind of hung out together, except there were, but you've got, 3,000 people and I don't know, 25. And it doesn't seem weird that if there are 25 people, they aren't going to be in all your classes, right? So it doesn't stand out as much as it did in elementary school. But it's still a thing. Why are only 25 people coming to our school? What's that going on? It's kind of like the white hippie school, I think, in retrospect. That's probably why there's a lot of, sailors, and it's a big sailing school. But I reached out. I talked to my members of my book club. It's not a white book club, So we talked we talked there about it. Read some other books. Again, very white though, to read some books. We're we don't want to just lean on our Black friends.
Well, you were reading Isabel Wilkerson, so that's a start.
Yeah. But we continued that. We did some group stuff there. And then the real big thing for me and for our group of cousins is that we started talking to Ryan. Ryan said, you need to talk to Kira. And first I spoke with Brokey, who's a cousin of mine, and he also said, you need to talk to Kira. But I was very, very conscious about, I don't want to, hi, you're Black, tell me what I need to do. That's the same fucking problem. That's the whole mammy thing. It's hi, I'm just like a little white girl and I just need some black people to like make me a better person. Like that's not what I wanted to do at all. Like I wanted to very much be who's the beautiful Aboriginal woman, you know, if you're coming to me because you want to ease your regret. No. I'm going to botch the quote, but if you're coming to me because your future or your salvation is bound up with mine, then come as friends. You know, it's the idea that like our salvation is intertwined and we need to be mutually working together. It can't just be me coming and asking for a favor. So I didn't want to just be like, hi, Kira, like we're talking about this. We're trying to process this in this small group of my family members, cousins. We're trying to figure out like, how were we raised? What did we miss? What are we not doing? What should we be doing? So like, you know, want to join in. It needs to be because it would be of value to her to speak with me as much as it would be value of me to speak with her. And so that's what it ended up being. And this idea that, you know, one of the things she said was, this isn't a hypothetical anymore. This isn't somebody reading a history book and going, wow, black people like those black people and white people like me and my family had this interaction ages ago and wasn't that long ago and it's still kind of happening today. It's your family enslaved my family. And now we have to pick up the pieces. It's real. It's tangible. It's in our blood. It's in our family history. We are the real people that are the future whispers of the past stories. And we have to take those whispers and translate them into something new. And so we had several really good conversations. I drove up to Baltimore and we sat and talked for hours and just kind of and realized that, you know, my family is very disjointed. It's not like the Prestons are all this one big like Preston family. Like there's different factions of us and different groups of us. And the group that I come from happens to be a little bit more liberal, you know, in general, and, you know, this, that, and the other. And but what really struck us as we talked about this, and other cousins that I had never met joined the conversation, is we had a lot of very similar experiences within our family and experiences with the world. So it meant that there was a cultural thread. And to me, it felt like that could become a microcosm, macrocosm relationship in which themes could be gleaned and practices and processes could be understood. And therefore, the conversations that we had within our family and then with the fractions could somehow be translated into something that other families could use to bridge that gap. It's kind of like, you know, the book Holes? Did you ever read that? Long time ago. It's like childhood book.
Yeah, there's a movie or something about it, right?
Yeah, they made a movie. So the idea that there's like these two kids that are bound up by their family's past, and there's a curse that needs to be broken, and they don't know about it. But in the course of their own lives, they're pushed towards that resolution. And they happen upon a moment in which the breaking of the curse is able to occur. It's kind of like that, I feel like. There's like this something, there's this key that there's almost like a pathway that could open that isn't possible now because of the cultural reverberations on both sides. That our ancestors were brought together. The ancestors that had a choice are my ancestors. So it can't be my choice. I have to just create space. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm curious about the steps along the way. So there's this larger goal of reconciliation, and What have been the major actionable items that have taken place already, and what is next steps for that?
Say actionable items were just trying to bring people together. That happened. Being able to have a conversation that continues, and it's continued for 3 years now, almost. That has happened. However, it's tricky because you're talking about family and you're talking with family. And you're talking about how you were raised with the people you were raised. And the people that raised you, their parents aren't on the call. So they can fully lay things at the feet of their parents. Whereas we can't. But there's the reality that the family is large. So you could have a grandchild speaking with a child, right? So I'd be the grandchild person. A grandchild speaking with the child from another tree branch. There you can have really deep, open, and honest conversation. So there's mechanisms that we're trying to figure out, is how do you work into these really deep, like my premise, my thought, and I think it's many people agree, but I don't want to make it somebody else's, right? I don't want to say like everybody thinks exactly the same as me. They don't. But something that's become a real thread for me is that if you are to take a person and to say that they are no longer a person, you know that they're a person. You have to change your mind and you have to justify it regularly to make them less than human. To dehumanize something, you have to change your own mind about what it means to be human. And then to dehumanize their children while you still have children, and your children don't have that change in their brain, and you have to watch them interact with these dehumanized people, and you have to then teach them to dehumanize. You have to change your brain again. You have to pass that on. And therefore, the actions that you do, the psychological, the physical, the emotional abuse that you put on a person so that they will believe that they are dehumanized, you have to do that to your own children too. But then you have to make them feel special as well, so that they feel better than the other people you're dehumanizing, but they still need to be afraid of thinking anything else other than what you have decided for them to think about people that they deeply love and care about. And you have to teach them that you can't trust them. And you have to teach those children that you can't truly be loved by them. And then those people who have been dehumanized have to protect themselves from the people that they have to care for but cannot love, because they will be hurt by them in the end. And they can't ever trust them fully. So these changes that occur, it's not how people work. People work community. People work based on trust. Individualism causes you to kill that in order to get your own benefit. So that has happened for generation after generation after generation. And that is existing today in society. It's reflected in our institutions. It's reflected in the way we disrespect the land, the way we treat each other, the way we treat strangers. And we're so big, there's so many of us, it's so easy to do now. It was a lot harder then. Humans are designed to exist in groups of like 50 to 200. That's how our brains operate best. And in that group, you're always going to be the best at something. You're always going to be needed by your community. That is not how our communities work now. They are millions upon millions of people, and individualism can take root anywhere because you've just got to get ahead. You've just got to get your piece of the pie. You got to get to tomorrow. And enough of us live in enough squalor, that you just want to do well for yourself. Like everyone. And so the changes in the brain, the body, the mind, I mean, it's all stored in the body everywhere. Like you can't just change your brain. Like you change your body, your mind, your emotions, the way you see the world. That is passed down generation after generation after generation. That's got to get healed somehow. that's got to get relieved somehow. That's the cultural trauma that I talk about. It's got to get dealt with, or it's just going to continue. And so that's the next step. If you can't sit and talk with people that you've been traumatized by, and I say that, I deeply love and care for everyone in my family, but that trauma was passed on from generation to generation to generation. And everyone just wants to be loved. They really do. Like, people just want to be loved and cared for and feel safe and be able to trust the people around them. And I don't think anybody can really feel like they can do that. Like, I think that's like really like a major problem with society. And if this is a way through that, our family putzing around in the dark, knocking into things, screwing up, doing dumb things, going down rabbit holes, making poor choices until we find something that does work, then I'm all for it. I'll keep messing with this, forcing it into the forefront of my mind until something changes, or until my kids take it in a better direction than I took it.
So this conversation about intergenerational trauma and the harm that's been passed down through each generation of Preston family members, I'm curious about how you've held that conversation with your own parents or grandparents, if you have.
Yeah, so it's not an easy conversation to have. I am the kind of person who does not like confrontation at all. I do not like to, so I try to have it in as compassionate a way possible. All of this lives in me. I am not sitting here going, I'm free and clear, and this is what's wrong with you, and so you need to fix you. The way that I approach this is I find a piece of it in myself, and I find the thread that goes backwards. And I acknowledge the piece in myself, and then I say, I think this passes back in this way. And this is something I'm working on, and these are the tools that I have found to help process it. I want to share them with you in case you're interested in doing the same.
Kira would say and has said that there are unresolved tensions within the Preston family, different factions like you described before.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously not every Preston family member supports these conversations even. And I'm curious, what would you say to those in your family who are more reluctant to face the past and who want to cling on to this more mythological history that has been passed down through the family?
I think that more than what I'd want to say, I would just want to understand more of their perspective. I feel like I'd be much more interested than having something to say to them. I'd be much more interested in hearing from them, but not in an antagonistic way, like, seeing a comment fly over on social media and the responses back kind of thing. Like, that doesn't interest me. That's not real. Like, that's not real. I want to sit down and have a cup of tea and talk about what they loved the most about their childhood and what they think is the most important for the children that come after them. I want to know those things. I want to know what upsets them about telling these stories, because it's not such a bad thing to say, well, this is just going to make people feel bad. Why are we making people feel bad? Why can't we just all move from today forward? That in and of itself, it's not a bad gloss. It's not a bad sentiment. And I actually, the one thing that I would say is intention doesn't always count. And if you look at things based on intention and based on historical appropriateness, you're missing an opportunity to change the future. So if a future where everyone feels respected and connected sounds good to you, then let's figure out how to get there, as opposed to worrying about what people feel about the past. Because if someone's attacking you, you're going to react, right? Like it's not, and not everyone's going to come along. You know, not everyone's going to agree. Like I can't go around expecting every single family member to want to do this, that, and the other. I also can't run around crusading. So this is something that really gets me. Historically, I swear, and it's a lot of comedians have done some funny bits about this, of just like white women rushing in and wanting to like fix everybody and like crusading on these ideas and it really doing no good. And I see this tendency of people wanting to like grab the relative that feels very strongly that our family and then like shake them and like speak to them until they give them their point of view. And it's like, I don't know, isn't their point of view kind of valuable just as it is without you doing anything to it? Because it's going to give us insight into what their experience was and what their perspective on the world is. And if we just take their perspective and say, it's no longer valuable, please check out, you're missing an opportunity to see something that we didn't see before. Like, I very much would be more interested in hearing their story and their experience and finding common ground than I am in saying, I have a story and it's better than yours. Like, you know? But the bit about intent and the bit about the future, that I think is the one key thing. Because a lot of what people say is like, well, I've never done anything to hurt anyone. I've never done anything. And it's like, maybe if you did something on the side, you don't know about it. Like you participating in X, Y, and Z might have actually caused this tendency to continue, right? So there's something that person can learn, but I can't be sitting here having a conversation waiting until I'm able to say that. I have try to make it short, one story that's helpful there, I think. I had a colleague once who said, you know, why would I want someone moving into my nice, clean neighborhood from a drug-riddled projects? Like, why would I want that? That just seems like asking for my children to be put in a bad place. And I'm like, well, that person might not want to live in those projects either. What do you have to say to them not wanting to be there? Well, they had their choices. You know, they're choosing to live that lifestyle. They're choosing those jobs. They're choosing that, you know, income. They're choosing that. And if that's all they can afford, then that's their choice. And I'm like, well, maybe it's not. And they're like, well, I mean, maybe it's not the children's choice that, you know, I don't know how I feel about their children. I'm like, okay, but the people you're talking about are the children of someone else. So you can see how that cycle perpetuates. And I think that's the problem, is that people don't think in circles. They think in straight lines. Time is not a straight line. It's a bunch of loops. And if you can start to show people the loops, then it softens, I think, their experience of what you're trying to get across. That I'm not like, okay, sometimes I do say we should just burn everything down. I know that's on recording, but like, I don't mean like in like riots or whatever. I just mean like, let's just start fresh. This isn't working. Like, you know, like just let's just get rid of all the offensive stuff and start over. Not realistic, clearly, but that feeling in me that this just isn't worth it perpetuating, like, let's just start fresh thing is there. But it's a missed opportunity to actually learn from things and move forward, which is kind of, I feel like, the theme of my own understanding of this is there's a lot of missed opportunities. And if I can identify them, then I can change that.
Thinking about the fraction family members, instead of a question for them, if you had a question to ask them, what would you want them to know about your experiences, like that shaped your becoming into this person that you are today? What would you want to share with them?
Well, that in a lot of ways, because of all this, I don't really know who I am. And I want to take this as an opportunity to define who I am instead of just accepting the sort of cultural descriptions and panaceas along the way. I'm very much interested in looking for a different way to be that can be reflected outward, and looking at, what are the small ways that I can engage with the world that, if amplified amongst more people, would become big changes. And I don't expect or think that there's going to be some kind of vast reconciliation necessarily in my lifetime. I don't expect or think that out of this is going to become like, yay, deep friendships from long lost not relatives, like that. I think there's a danger in that. Like, I don't expect anyone to fully, truly trust me. And I'm okay with that. Whereas I think before, I was afraid of my family's past because it would mean that I was no longer fully, truly trustworthy. But I think I'm okay with that now. I just want to be, and I just want to keep moving and not ever stop questioning and analyzing and experiencing. I don't want to get stuck. I don't want to end up in my later years stuck in a worldview that's perpetuating loss and pain and suffering. So, but I guarantee you, generations later, if this world is even here generations later, there'll be people that look back, and not specifically on me. I don't consider myself important enough to be specifically seen in the future, but the generalized person of this time are going to be like, what the hell were they thinking? That was terrible. How could they have done that? Like, anybody who doesn't think that there's not, you know what I mean? Like, I look back on the past and I'm like, what the hell were they thinking? Why did they do that? And I feel fully confident that in the future, people will look back at my lifetime and be like, what the hell were they thinking? Why did they do that? And you kind of have to be okay with that. And I think maybe the people that look backwards and don't want to see the bad stuff, don't want to see the duality, don't want to see the complexity, it's because they don't want people to look back and see them that way. And I get that. Like, we're all trying. Even if we're trying up the wrong tree, or whatever that phrase is, I guess barking up the wrong tree, trying up the wrong tree. That's not a phrase.
I like it. I'm gonna put that on a t-shirt and
trying up the wrong tree.
You talked about reconciliation, and I'm curious about, and this is a two-part. What does reconciliation mean to you? And if you could wave a magic wand to reconcile the past, what would it look like? What would that be?
Those are the money questions. Those are the questions that really don't have full answers, but I can give you my loose watercolor that has yet to dry. So what does reconciliation look like? It is something that none of us have ever seen. It is a goal of humanity that is not necessarily even possible. It is a point at which the echoes and reverberations of a culture's past no longer drive the living members of that culture in a particular direction without the full participation of those being driven. So I can't tell you exactly what it would be because nobody's achieved it yet. Nobody said, you might have like this country back in the 1500s invaded this country and they all hated each other for hundreds of thousands of years. But look, these two just got married and they're happy. That's just two people. That's not cultural. What does it look like for two cultures that have come together in such a painful way, one by choice, one by force? What does it look like for those two cultures to shake hands with one another and engage in a future, not where they're one culture, because the idea is not to like kill off one culture or kill off both cultures and create a totally new culture. There's a lot of incredible things that have occurred over the years that you could bury them. We could all just, blow up and have to start fresh, and someone will find tablets one day and, whatever, or a USB drive that works. But you see what I'm saying? Like, it's a space where you don't feel defined or limited by the atrocities that happened. You feel empowered by the space, time, distance, and experiences that have happened between those atrocities and today. And the reverberations of those atrocities are not the bedrock of the society. The entire system has to change.
I'm curious, what is the difference in your thinking between reconciliation and reparation?
Reparation is a potential avenue and component of reconciliation. It could be a means to an end. Reparation could be emotional. It can be monetary. It can be legislative. It can be it can be systematic, or not systemic, but like it can be changes to the system that no longer allow for advantages and disadvantages to be doled out according to somebody's whim or a cultural whim. Because in a lot of ways, it's just a cultural crank that's just going. And the people that take benefit from it keep cranking it because they're the ones at the crank. And it's like everyone else is just kind of going that direction. It's like when they say, that companies say, well, it's your job to recycle. No, you just made the thing that needs to be recycled. It's your job to make something that isn't, but they're not going to do that. They make plenty of money. They have to be legislated. They have to be regulated. And that's a dangerous word. You say regulation and people flip their shit. But that's the way humans are. Like, there has to be parameters. There have to be boundaries. And I feel like there's like a massive boundary setting situation that needs to happen between the two cultures. Like, there needs to be some boundaries here. This relationship is not acceptable as it is. And then we need to figure out what those boundaries look like. And then we need to work through them until we can create different boundaries or whatever. But reparations themselves, like, how do you pay someone if you're thinking about it monetarily, which is what a lot of people think about? How do you pay someone to compensate for the loss of an entire generation, multiple generations of lives and possibility? You can't pay an individual directly, and you can't say which individual deserves what monies. Does the person who came over 20 years ago and had to live in a segregated and racist country have as much claim as the person who is generationally linked to the individuals that were enslaved, they have to have some claim. They've lived it, they've experienced it, but what's the percentage? And when you reduce people to numbers, you're playing into the actual system, because that's what the system does. It reduces people to numbers. But there is a severe disparity and disadvantage. If people can't afford to buy houses, if people can't afford to move, if people can't afford to change their lives, that's unacceptable. And that requires money. So it's so much more complicated, but it needs to be talked about. It needs to be figured out. Those things need to be discussed and sorted out. And that's a scary thing to talk about, because anybody who has money, they have it. Oh, there's this wonderful story. It's not mine, and I can't remember the guy whose it is. I'm going to say it anyway real quick because I love it and I use it all the time, and I'll find the person and I'll send you a message later so it can be properly attributed. But this is not my story. I did not come up with this. It's a philosopher guy. You have two kids. You go to the park. The ice cream truck arrives. You buy 2 ice cream cones. You hand them both to one child. The other child starts bawling. You realize your mistake and you say, "You, give that ice cream cone back to the other one." Well, you're asking a kid you just gave 2 ice cream cones to give it to the other one. So they do. And then you go, "Whoop, I fixed it completely. We're good to go. Problem solved." And the psychologist leans in and says, "But you never should have done it in the first place." So that's the issue. And that's the issue that we're grappling with as a country, is we never should have done it in the first place. How the hell do you fix something you never should have done in the first place? Because you can chop things up and even them out as much as you want. It's not going to fix the problem. And you're going to create resentment in the people that you've just chopped it up from. Doesn't mean you shouldn't chop it up, though. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Right? You should definitely take that ice cream cone and give it back to the other kid. Like, that's clear in that story. But it's not very clear when you look at a society. So that's if I was a genius and I was a brilliant person and could come up with the clean answer to this, man, I would have written that down and sent it out to everyone a long time ago, because it's deeply sad.
Well, I think that reparations, whenever you even mention the word, some people shut down automatically. It's like a gut reaction that they don't even want to have the conversation, especially if they have wealth or if they have benefited from this, right? So just thanks for sharing your perspective on it and being open to the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a conversation that has to be had, and it has to be had in really dynamic, creative ways. This requires like the most beautiful, creative minds of all different walks and thoughts, like philosophers and psychologists and engineers and mathematicians and poets and mothers and daughters and fathers and children. And, it really requires like the greatest human creativity of all time to come together on this.
To switch gears a little bit, I'll start my concluding type of questions.
Yeah.
I've already kind of been in that vein, but
ratcheting.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk of an anniversary, a 250th celebration at Smithfield.
Yeah.
How do you celebrate your family's history while also acknowledging the darker aspects of it?
Well, depends on who you are. Me personally, I struggle with celebrating. I feel like it's important for me to be a part of this, and to where I work on the committee to help create components of it. And there's a very strong push for there to be a lot of full story, truth exploration opportunities for people to participate in. It's tricky though. For me, to compartmentalize doesn't seem like the right method, I think I'm just going to have to be uncomfortable. Like, I think I'm just going to have to be uncomfortable and then really pay attention to that discomfort and analyze it and experience it and explore it. I don't want to pretend like there was nothing that my family ever did that was interesting or of value. Like, I don't think that makes sense. I don't want to ever lose sight of how they were able to do it. And it wasn't just them, for sure. It was the whole group of them all doing that, right? Like, that's fine. Like, I'm not like, it was my family and my family alone's fault. Like, that, not none of that. But it's very much the idea that this is uncomfortable and it just has to be that way. And if I'm avoiding the discomfort, then I'm avoiding the conversation. And it's also an opportunity for me to talk to a lot of relatives that aren't participating in the calls that I participate in. And not as an interrogator, but just as another person with another perspective, deeply curious about their perspective and what insight it might bring towards how to move into a future that doesn't look like the present.
I wonder if the family thought about it less in terms of anniversary and celebration as a type of memorializing the past in a way. I wonder if that type of framework might change.
What about just a remembering? Like, a remembering seems proper.
There's been talk about the Oral History Project taking some type of role in the anniversary. And if that were to happen, what would you want that to be? What would you want this Oral History Project to shed light on?
Gosh, I would love for it to be a space where people can come and just listen and reflect and learn and experience and maybe take a moment to reflect on themselves. I think reflection, self-reflection is, gosh, that's like a tenet of any religion, isn't it? That's the path. If you don't self-reflect, then you're not really doing it, are you? And I think that that's something that, as we've talked about in this conversation, what's the path of least resistance? Let's go that way. That's not self-reflection. So I would love for the reunion, the celebration, the memorial, the remembering to actually be a powerful place of consideration, a place where people try on some ideas or thoughts that they had been maybe afraid to look at before.
If you were directing this oral history project, are there questions that you would ask that I'm not thinking to ask? And you can take a minute to consider that. It's a big question.
Yeah, I will take a minute to consider that. I feel like that's not something I want to just like fly off. Well, I had my list here actually, and
While you're doing that, I'm going to reflect on my own questions and see if there's anything I wanted to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I realized I didn't answer the second part of that other question. If I could wave a magic wand.
Oh, yeah. That's a hard one, too, I know. That's why I don't normally ask two-part questions at one time, because people always only answer one, but I wanted you to think holistically about that question.
It kind of was bound up with that first one, but I mean, here's what I would say. If I could wave a magic wand, it would look like a world where all of the potential and the opportunity and the fantastic creativity and innovation that would have come had cultures been allowed to develop on their own without being destroyed and exploited, it would be that world. And I have a feeling that that world would be far more integrated with the natural world, and far more integrated with a deep respect for cultural differences and similarities. Because that's what was missing so much from before, is that there was this inability to see the similarities in a way that would allow you to see yourself. So I see a future with a magic wand where those innovations and the creativity that was stifled and destroyed and just not destroyed, but was stopped, you know, like entire continents were stopped in their tracks from whatever developing brilliance might have been coming about, whether it was on a different train than the Industrial Revolution or whatever. Like, you know, maybe we might not have any of like this crazy internet stuff. We might have something way better. Like, that's what I would love. I would love to know what would have been, what could have been. Because if it was possible then, it's possible now. So my magic wand would do that.
I'm curious, are there ancestors in your family history with whom you personally identify?
Not really. They were so mythological, you know, like, and they were so incomplete as people. You'll only hear the good stories, you know. There's the no. There's one lady, not from the Preston family. I think she was a Valentine maybe, or maybe she was a skinker. I'm not sure. In Richmond, who like rescued a bunch of people from a burning theater. I think she may have actually died in it. She like rescued like a bunch of kids and people from the theater, and that was nice. That was a nice story, but I don't know that I identify with her. Like, I haven't saved any children from burning theaters, so
Maybe admiration would be a better
yeah.
word.
Yeah, I admire that people felt enough conviction to do something. I don't necessarily agree with their convictions, but as someone who wavers a lot and has a hard time speaking up or making changes or doing something meaningful and defined, I think I admire that. But I can't admire the convictions with which they made those decisions. And I don't think I know them well enough. I don't think I have enough context.
My students last fall, I was teaching African American history since 1865, and we toured Smithfield. That was one of the first lessons of the class. And if it were up to you, what would that tour of Smithfield, what would you want students to take away from a tour of Smithfield?
I would love for people to take away an understanding of the passage of time and people, and that the land and the space has been there to witness it all. And over to what you see right now is not what you would have seen if you had come back X amount of years, X amount of years, X amount of years, X amount of years, going back to the Ice Age. Like, time passes, time is massive, and people are just this little blip on it. And they feel this distinct ownership, at least some of them do. And what did those time periods reflect in society? What do they tell us about the passage of culture and human experience? And I would love for people to come away with more questions than they had going in. Questions about themselves, about their place in that time continuum, about their family's place in it, about the future places in it, and the possibilities.
Is there anything throughout the interview that you wanted to talk about or go back to?
I don't know, the way my brain works, there were probably a bunch of random things I was going to say and I didn't say, who knows? But I think as it unfolded is as it unfolded, and that in and of itself is a moment in time that's worth collecting.
I have like 30 questions here. I've asked maybe half of them, but
Yeah.
I think I want to ask one final question. And what do you want future generations to understand about your actions in this moment? Like, what kind of legacy would you like to leave behind as it relates to this project of just having conversations about the past that are really difficult?
Gosh, all it takes is stepping into a space, a willingness to have a conversation, to not get it right, to be left feeling a little naked, and to realize that you don't just have to talk about things that have answers. Sometimes talking about things that don't have answers is far more interesting and valuable. And if you keep doing that, if that becomes a practice, then you may discover answers to things that you didn't know you even had questions about.
Well, Mary and Lyle, I want to thank you for sharing your story with me and for the work that you're doing. I believe in the potential in a project like this. I think that there is something that we could learn from the insights gained between these conversations between the fractions and the Prestons. And I hope that there is, but I like the way you put it. Sometimes it's worth asking questions, even if there may not be a solution. So thank you for your time, and thanks for asking those questions.
Well, thank you for your time. I feel very honored to be asked questions. It's just good to keep this conversation happening, I think. And in any way that I can be a part of that, I'm sure I will look silly in many ways and forms over time. But I don't want to ever stop having these conversations, because I feel very strongly that there's something in them. I don't know what it is, but there's something there, and I want to keep teasing at it, and questioning myself and changing my directions and that kind of thing. So I appreciate your time, and I feel very honored to be included in a project of this nature.
Well, if there's anything after the interview that you want to talk about that you didn't think to include, feel free to reach back out, and we can always schedule a follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, you've got like 30 questions left, so if you feel like there's one that needs to go in there, let me know.
Well, I think you covered a lot of them, so I didn't want to be redundant, but
for sure.
But it was a really great conversation and a great start to a larger conversation that needs to happen. So thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, have a lovely day, and it was nice to talk to you.